So now we are going to tackle about the social control. First slide is I have said that educational plans and projects seeing education in terms of life experience are thereby committed to framing and adopting an intelligent theory or if you please philosophy of experience. Otherwise, they are the mercy of every intellectual breeze that happens to blow. I have tried to illustrate the need for such a theory by calling attention to two principles which are fundamental in constitution of experience: the principle of interaction and continuity. If then I am asked why I have spent so much time on expounding a rather abstract philosophy, it is because practical attempts to develop schools based upon the idea that education is found in life experience are bound to exhibit inconsistencies and confusions unless they are guided by some conception of what experience is and what marks of educative experience from non-educative and miseducative experience. I now come to a group of actual educational questions, the discussion of which will, I hope, provide topics and materials that are more concrete than discussion up to this point. So, the author says that if we believe education comes from real life experiences, then we must create a clear, intelligent theory about what experience really means. You cannot just say learning happens through experience without understanding how it works. So, if educators do not have a strong philosophy or clear guide, they will easily be influenced by new trends or popular ideas that keep changing. So, in short, education needs a strong foundation so it will not become confused or unstable. It explains that experience is built on two important principles, which is the interaction and continuity. So the interaction means that learning happens through the relationship between a person and their environment, including other people and situations. So the continuity means that every experience affects future experiences. What you learn today shapes what and how you will learn tomorrow. So these two ideas help us to understand how experience works in education. They show that learning is not random but connected and ongoing. So the author then explains why he spent a lot of time discussing abstract philosophy. He says that try to base education on life experiences will become confused if they do not clearly understand what makes an experience truly educational. So not all experiences help a person grow. Some may not teach anything useful and others may even harm learning. So therefore, educators must know the difference between educative, non-educative, and miseducative experiences. So it ends by saying that he will now move to more practical and concrete educational question to make the discussion clearer. So next, social control is a normal part of everyday life and it does not always mean a loss of personal freedom even outside of school. People naturally follows rules that help maintains order and cooperation. So, sorry. So, this paragraph begins by saying that when we think about problems in education, it can help it can help to first stop thinking about school. Instead, we should look at other situations in everyday life. So by doing this, we can better understand how people naturally behave and relate to one another, which can give us insights about education. The author explains that in society, even a good and responsible citizens lives under other many forms of social control. So, however, most of the time, people do not feel that these controls limits their freedom. Even someone like theoretical anarchist who believes government control is bad still thinks that some kind of social control would exist without a government. So it shows that some form of control is natural and necessary and new and human life. So the author then suggests looking at simple daily examples of social control, especially among young people. So for example, nasa atong PPT, which is wait, which is when children play games, they follow agreed rules, and without those rules, the game cannot continue. So, for example, when children play games like tag, basketballs, or footballs, they follow rules. So, this guide these rules guides their behavior and make the game possible without rules. Game possible. So, without rules, there would be no organized game, just only confusion. So the paragraph explains that when disagreement happens during games, children use umpires, discussion, or simple forms of arbitration to solve them. If they cannot settle disputes, the game stops. So it shows that rules and agreed ways of solving problems are necessary for group activities to continue smoothly. Excuse me. Next is di na mapislit. So, on the next slide, there are certain fairly obvious controlling features of such situations to which I want to call attention. The first is that the rules are a part of the game. They are not outside of it. No rules, then no game. So, different rules than a different game. As long as the game goes on with a reasonable smoothness, the players do not feel that they are submitting to external imposition, but that they are playing the game. And the second place, an individual may at times feel that a decision is unfair and he may even get angry, but he is not being objecting to a rule but to what he claims is a violation of it. To some, one-sided and an unfair action. In the third place, the rules, and hence the conduct of the game, are fairly standardized. There are recognized ways of counting out, of selections of sides, as well as for positions to be taken, movements to be made, and etc. Uh, these rules have the sanction of tradition and precedent. Those playing the game have seen perhaps professional matches and they want to emulate their elders. An element that is conventional is pretty strong. Usually, a group of youngsters change the rules by which they play only when the adult group to which they look for models have themselves made change, and the rules, while the change made by the elders is at least supposed to conduce to making the game more skillful and more interesting to spectators. Um, the paragraph explains that rules are not something separate from a game, they are part of the game itself. So without rules, there is no game and there's no rules. And if the rules change, if the rules change, the games also change. When the game runs smoothly, players do not feel controlled by the rules. Instead, they simply feel like they are playing. It also says that when a player gets upset, it is usually not because of the rule itself. Instead, the players believe someone has broken or unfairly applied the rule. So this shows that the problem is not with having rules, but with how they how they are followed. So the paragraph also explains that many rules are traditional and widely accepted. Children often copy how adults or professionals play, and they usually change rules only when older or skilled players do. These changes are believed to improve the game, making it more skillful or more enjoyable to watch. Next, now the general conclusion I would draw is the control of individual action is affected by the whole situation in which individuals are involved, in which they share and with which they are cooperative or interacting parts. For even in a competitive game, there is a certain kind of participation of sharing a common experience. Stated the other way around, those who take part do not feel that they are bossed by individual person or are being subjected to the will of some outside superior person. When violent disputes do arise, it is usually on the alleged ground that umpire or some person on the other side is being unfair. In other words, that in such cases some individuals is trying to impose his individual will on someone else. So the so the authors explains that control over a person's actions does not usually come from one powerful individual. So instead it comes from the whole situation where people are working or interacting together. So in group activities, even competitive ones, everyone shares in a common experience, in this shared participation naturally guides their behavior. Because of this, people usually do not feel like they are being controlled or ordered around by someone superior. So they feel that they are simply taking part in an activity with others. So when serious arguments happen, it is often because someone believes another person, like an umpire, is being unfair. So in those cases, the problem is not the rules of the group, but the feeling that someone is forcing their personal will on others. Next is, so on the fifth slide, wait, on the fifth slide, I do not mean by this that there are no occasions upon which the authority of, say, the parent does not have to intervene and exercise fairly direct control. But I do say that in the first place, the number of these occasions is slight in comparison in comparison with the number of those in which the control is exercised by situations in which all take part. And what is even more important, the authority in question, when exercised in a well-regulated household or other community group, is not manifestation of merely personal will. The parent or teachers exercise it as the representative and agent of the interests of the group as a whole. With respect to the first point, in a well-ordered school, the main reliance for control of this and that individual is upon the activities carried on and upon the situation in which these activities are maintained. The teacher reduces to a minimum the occasion in which he or she has to exercise authority in a personal way, when it is necessary, in the second place, to speak and act firmly. It is done on behalf of the interest of the group, not as an exhibition of personal power. This makes the difference between action which is arbitrary and that which is just and fair. So, so the paragraph, um, so the paragraph explains that sometimes parents or teachers do needs to step in and directly control child's actions. But these situations are few compared to when control happens naturally through group activities. In most cases, people follow the rules because they are part of a shared situation, not because someone is forcing them. It also explains that when authority is used properly, it is not about the adult's personal power. Parents or teachers act on behalf of the group's interests, making their actions fair rather than arbitrary. In a well-organized school or household, the main guidance comes from the activities and shared situations. And adults only intervene personally when necessary. So children can feel the difference between fair authority and bossy behavior, even if they cannot clearly explain it in words. They naturally sense when someone is acting for the good of everyone and when someone is just trying to control others but out of personal power. So in fact, children may even be more sensitive to this difference than adults. The text also shows that children learn this through playing with others. They are willing to follow a leader if that person helps make the activity better and more enjoyable. So, however, they strongly dislike being dictated to, and if someone becomes too bossy, they may choose to leave the group. Uh, Next is the sixth slide. So, I do not wish to refer to the traditional school in ways which set up a caricature in line of a picture, but I think it is fair to say that one reason the personal commands of the teachers so often played on undue rule and a reason why the order which existed was so much a matter of sheer obedience to the will of an adult was because the situation almost forced it upon the teacher. So the school was not a group or community held together by participation in common activities. Consequently, the normal proper conditions of control were lacking. Their absence was made up for and for considerable extent had to be made up for by the direct intervention of the teacher who, as saying when kept order. He kept it because order was in the teacher's keeping instead of residing in the shared work being done. Um, the author does not in this paragraph, the author does not want to unfairly criticize traditional schools, but he believes there was a problem in how control was handled. In many traditional classrooms, teachers relied heavily on giving personal commands, and students were expected to obey simply because the teacher said so. So this happened not just because of the teacher, but because of the school environment. Environment almost required it. So the school was not organized as a real community where students shared meaningful activities. So because of this, the natural way of maintaining order through shared participation was missing. So as a result, teachers had to step in directly to keep order. Order depended on the teacher's authority instead of coming naturally from the shared work and cooperation of the students. Um, so in slide 7, the conclusion is that in what are called the new schools. The primary source of social control resides in the very nature of the work done as a social enterprise in which all individuals have an opportunity to contribute and to which all feel a responsibility. Most children are naturally sociable. Isolation is even more to them than to adults. A genuine community life has its ground in its natural sociability, but community life does not organize itself in an enduring way purely spontaneously. It requires I mean, it requires thought and planning ahead. The educator is responsible for a knowledge of individuals and for knowledge of subject matter that will enable activities to be selected which lend themselves to social organization, an organization in which all individuals have an opportunity to contribute something and it is and which the activities in which all participate are the shift career of control. So this in this paragraph, it explains that in what we are called new schools, social controls comes from the shared works students do together. When learning activities are organized as group efforts where everyone can contribute, students naturally feels responsible and involved. Control does not mainly come from the teacher's authority, but from participation in meaningful group activities. It also says that children are naturally sociable and enjoy being part of a group. However, a strong community does not just happen on its own. It needs careful thought and planning. So the teacher's role is to understand both the students and subject matters in order to choose activities that encourage cooperation. So when activities are well planned and inclusive, they become the main source of order and responsibility in the classroom. Next is I am not romantic enough about the young to suppose that every pupil will respond or that any child of normally strong impulses will respond on every occasion. There are likely to be some who, when they come to school, are already victims of injurious conditions outside of the school and who have become so passive and unduly docile that they fail to contribute. There will be others who, because of previous experience, are bumptious and unruly and perhaps downright rebellious, but it is certain that the general principle of social control cannot be predicated upon such cases. It is also true that no general rule can be laid down for dealing with such cases. The teachers has to deal with them individually. They fall into general classes, but two are exactly alike. The educator has to discover as best he or she can the causes for the recalcitrant attitudes. He or she cannot if she education he or she cannot. If the educational process is to go on, make it questions of pitting one will against another in order to see which is strongest, nor yet allow the unruly and non-participating pupils to stand permanently in the way of the educative activities of others. Exclusion, perhaps, is the only available measure at a given juncture, but it's not solution, for it may strengthen the very causes which have both about the undesirable antisocial attitude, such as desire for attention or to show off. Um, so in this paragraph, it explains that not every student will always respond positively in school. Some students may come from harmful or difficult situation outside school which can make them too passive and unwilling to participate. So others may have past experiences that make them aggressive, disruptive, or rebellious in class. So the author says that the general idea of social control in education cannot be based on these special cases. There is no single rule that works for all difficult students because each child is different. So teachers must understand the individual causes of a student's behavior and handle each case carefully. It should not become a battle of wills between teacher and student, and at the same time, one distracted student should not be allowed to stop others from learning. Even removing a student from class may sometimes be necessary, but does not truly solve the deeper problem and may even make the behavior worse. Next is exceptions rarely prove a rule or give a clue to what the rule should be. I would not therefore attach too much importance to these exceptional cases, although it is true at present that progressive schools are likely often to have more than their fair share of these cases. Since parents may send children to such schools as last resort, I do not think weaknesses in school when it is found in progressive schools arises In any event, from these exceptional cases, it is much more likely to arise from failure to arrange in advance for the kind of work, by which I mean all kinds of activities engaged in, which will create situations that of themselves tend to exercise control over what this, that, and the other pupil does and how he does it. This failure most often goes back to lack of sufficiently thought- thoughtful planning in advance. The causes of for such lack are varied. The one which is peculiarly, peculiarly important to mention this connection and the idea that such advanced planning is unnecessary and even that it is inherently hostile to the legitimate freedom of those being instructed. So the paragraph explains that unuseful or difficult cases should not be used to decide the general rule in education. Although progressive schools may sometimes have more challenging students because parents send them there as a last option, these students are not the main reason for weak discipline or control. The real problem is the author says usually comes from poor planning. If teachers do not carefully plan activities that naturally guide students' behavior, even control becomes weak. So, strong classroom orders develops when activities are designed. So, strong classroom orders develop when activities are designed in a way that encourages responsibility and cooperation. Sometimes teachers avoid planning because they think it limits students' freedom, but the author suggests that good planning actually supports true and meaningful freedom. So on the 10th slide, now of course it is quite possible to have preparatory planning to the teacher done in such a rigid and unequally inflexible fashion that it does not an adult imposition, which is non which is nonetheless external because executed with the fact and the semblance of respect for individual freedom. But this kind of planning does not follow inherently from the principle involved. I do not know what are the greater maturity of the teacher and teacher's greater knowledge of the world, of subject matters and of individuals is for unless the teacher can arrange conditions that are conducive to community activity and to organization which exercises control over individual impulses by the mere fact that all are engaged in communal projects. Because the kinds of advanced planning heretofore engaged in has been so routine as to leave little room for the free play individual thinking for contributions due to the extensive individual experience, it does not follow that all the planning must be rejected. On the contrary, there is incumbent upon the educator the duty of instituting a much more intelligent and consequently more difficult kind of planning. He must survey the capacities and needs of the particular set of individual with whom he is dealing and must at the same time arrange the condition which provide the subject matter or content for experiences that satisfy these needs and develops these capacities. The planning must be flexible enough to permit free play for individuality of experience and yet firm enough to give direction towards continuous development of power. So in this paragraph, it explains that teachers' planning can sometimes become too rigid and controlling. So when so so when planning it is too strict and flexible, it can make feel like adults are forcing their ideas on students even if it's done politely. So however, this kind of control is not the true purpose of planning. So the author also argued. also argues that a teacher's greater knowledge and maturity should be used to create conditions where students can work together in meaningful community activities. So, good planning should guide students naturally through shared project, not just surpass their individuality. So, just because past planning was too routine and limited students' freedom does not mean all planning is bad. So, a teacher have the responsibility to plan more intelligently and carefully. So they must understand the needs and abilities of the students and design learning experiences that they help them grow. So planning should be flexible enough to allow personal expression but structured enough to guide students toward continuous development. Next is the 11th slide. Sorry, this is the ninth slide and this is the 10th. And now we're moving to the 11th. The 11th slide, the presentation. So the presentation is a suitable one to say something about the province and office of the teacher. The principle that development of experience comes about through interaction means that education is essentially a social process. This quality is realized in the degree in which individuals form a community group. It is absorbed to exclude the teachers from membership in a group. As the most mature member of the group, he has a particular responsibility for the conduct of the interaction and intercommunication, which are the very life of the group as a community. That children are individuals whose freedom should be respected, while the more mature person should have no freedom, as the individual is an idea to absorb to require refutation. So the tendency to exclude the teacher from positive and leading share in direction of the activities of the community of which he is a member is another instance of reaction from extreme to another. So when pupils were a class rather than social group, the teachers necessarily acted largely from outside, not as director of process of exchange in which all had share. When education is based upon experience and educative experience is seen to be a social process, the situations changes radically. Teacher loses the position of external boss or the or dictator but takes on that on that of a leader of a group activities. In this paragraph, uh, it explains the role of the teachers in education. Since learning happens through interaction, education is naturally a social process. Um, a real learning environment becomes strong when it functions as community where everyone, including the teacher, is a member. So the teacher should not be excluded from the group. So as the most mature and experienced member, the teacher has special responsibility to guide the interaction and communication within the class. It would be unreasonable to respect the freedom of students by denying the teacher any freedom or leadership role. The paragraph also explains that in traditional classroom, students were treated as a class rather than a social group. So the teacher acted like an outside authority or dictator. But when education is based on shared experience, the teacher's role changes. Instead of being a role, the teacher becomes a leader who guides and participates in group activities. Next slide is this will be the 12th. So, um, And discussing the conduct of games as an example of a normal social control, reference was made to presence of a standardized conventional factor and counterpart of this factor in school life is found in the questions of manners, especially of good manners and the manifestations of politeness and courtesy. The more we know about customs in different parts of the world is different times in the history of mankind, the more we learn how much manners differ from the place to place and time to time. This fact proves that there is a large conventional factor involved, but there is no group at any time or place which does not have some code of manners, as for examples with respect to proper ways to greetings to other person. The particular form of convention takes as nothing fixed and absolute about it, but the existence of some form of convention is not it's not itself convention. It is a uniform attendant of all social relationship. At the very least, it is the oil which prevents or reduces friction. So in this 12, I mean in this paragraph, it compares rules in games to manners in school and society. Just like games have standard rules, social life has manners such as politeness and courtesy. So these manners help guide how people behave toward one another. So in this paragraph, it also explains that manners are different in various cultures and historical periods, which shows that they are partly based on convention or traditional. There is no single fixed way of greeting or behaving that is the same everywhere. So, however, every society has some kind of code of manners, even if the specific forms of manners change. The need for them does not. Manners are always present in social relationships because they help people to get along. So they act it like an oil in a machine, reducing conflict and making interactions smoother. Lastly, the 13th slide. Um,
Pwede naman naka-slide ba yun?
it is possible, of course, for these social forms to become, as we say, mere formalities. They may become merely outward show with no meaning behind them, but the avoidance of empty ritualistic forms of social intercourse does not mean the rejection of every formal elements. It rather indicates the need for development of forms of intercourse that are inherently appropriate to social situations. Visitors Visitors to some progressive schools are shocked by the lack of manners they come across. One who knows the situation better is aware that to some extent their absence is due to the eager interest of children to go on with what they are doing. In their eagerness, they may, for example, bump into each other and visitor with no word of apology. One might say that this condition is better than a display of merely external accompanying intellectual and emotional lack of interest in schoolwork, but it also represents a failure in education, a failure to learn one of the most important lessons of life, that of mutual accommodation and adaptation. Education is going on in a one-sided way, where attitudes and habits are in process of formation that stands in the way of the future learning that springs from easy and ready sorry kulit ready contact and communication with others. So, so in this paragraph, it explains that social manners can sometimes become empty formalities actions done only for show without real meaning. So, however, avoiding fake or ritualistic behavior does not mean we should remove all forms of politeness. Instead, we should develop manners that truly fit and support real social situations. So the paragraph gives an example from some progressive school where visitors notice a lack of manners. Sometimes this happens because children are so interested and focused in their activities that they forget to say excuse me or sorry. While this may be better than students who act polite but are not genuinely engaged in learning, it still shows a weakness in education. And the author says this as a failure because students must also learn how to adjust to others and live harmoniously in a group. So education should not only focus on interest and activity but also on developing habits of respect and considerations. So without learning proper social behavior, students may struggle in the future with communication and cooperations. And that's would be all. Thank you.